Hi, I'm Joe Higgins. I'm a Monotype instructor at the Art Students League of Denver, and today I'd like to show you how to make monotypes at home. There's many ways to do it. The method we'll use today uses professional grade materials, but they're relatively inexpensive. They're fairly easy to use and they yield great results. Why don't we try it? Monotypes are a one-of-a-kind printmaking process in which a number of different styles and techniques are possible. Here are some basic items you'll want to make a monotype. There's many others you can add depending on your imagination or what you have around the house, but these are a good start. First is a hardware store putty knife, nice and springy. And that one is useful for cleaning and for mixing ink. Any brush you have laying around the house. Cotton swabs. This is a mat board splint cut into different sizes. That can be a very useful item, as we'll see. This is a cake batter spatula, and it's good for cleaning, but you can also use it for drawing. And of course, the old concert t-shirt that you've turned into a rag. This is part of my youth. Going away as we speak, but the rags do better, the cotton rags, the t-shirts especially, with cleaning up. And you can use it for far longer than a paper towel, so it's earth friendly. And this is some dish soap, diluted 10 to 1, 10 parts water, 1 part dish soap. Don't make it too much stronger because it'll leave a residue, but this is great for cleaning up, and it cleans up the hands, the plexi, and the tools. So we'll show you how to clean up later. And finally, we have a rubber brayer. Soft rubber. This one's made by Speedball, and nice easy roller, and it's great for applying ink. As a matter of fact, it is specifically designed to apply a consistent amount of ink, which is very important. The brush is the first thing we pick up, but in fact it applies very much different amounts of ink according to how you use it. And so, in a way, it takes a lot more practice to get used to it. The brayer might be a good place to start. You can get different sized brayers, and this one is a bigger one. It's also soft rubber. You can try it with hard rubber for rolling. The soft rubbers are best for applying ink. But this one is the proper size for the print, and thus it is handy for rolling. Now you can use a rolling pin. You can use a Baron, which is designed for hand rubbing prints. You can even use a spoon, any flat object that'll allow you to rub the back of the paper. Plexiglass. You can also use a Mylar sheet. You can technically use anything that is smooth and takes ink well. But this is what I've always used, partially because it's light, portable, and it takes ink well. And you can also draw on the back of it with a Sharpie and create this nice template. And the template, the outside line, is the size of your paper. This helps you to make consistent prints because you'd be printing in the same place on the paper each time. So you can do multiple layers. And the inside line that I've added is a border. It creates a nice clean border if you want to frame it up later. Or it can be handy when you're doing multiple layers. So the border can be very handy, but you don't necessarily need it. It's kind of up to you. But I do recommend the outside line at the sides of the paper because that helps you to gauge where you're going to put the print, and you can roll it that way. Now, since we have the paper out, this is a Reeves lightweight. It's a relatively cheap printing paper, and so it's going to provide a nice professional look for you. You can try other types of paper. It's a very experimental thing. I've had good luck with this, especially when hand rolling. You can print it dry. Other papers, you can wet them down, and that helps you print, but that's much more complicated, and we won't discuss that in this video. But this Reeves lightweight, kind of an off-white. You can also get an Arch wove text and try that. There's other papers you can try, Arch 88. You can try some watercolor paper from around your house, and I recommend you get the cold press with the smooth surface. But you can try any type of paper, but it's you're on your own with that. This paper can be ordered online, as can the plexiglass and the Brayer. So those are pretty simple tools, and they are very nice for making prints. Mixing and preparing the ink. What we're using today is Akua inks. They're a professional grade, but they're also non-toxic and water soluble. This makes them great for using with kids, but I do, and for using at home too, because they don't smell up the house. But I do recommend that if you're letting your kids use them, that you work with them, right alongside with them, at least for the first time, because they're not easy to use for kids. They're relatively easy to use for us, especially if we've had experience with art supplies, but they're not necessarily easy to use for kids, and especially when it comes to cleanup time. They do clean up well, though. They clean up with soap and water, and it's the same Dawn detergent solution that I showed you before, and a cotton rag, so they clean up real well. This is a blending medium, and that is a it takes the place of water. Don't use water with the Akuas. It just makes them harder to use and harder to clean up. But you can use the blending medium to create watercolor effects or thinner, more transparent effects. There's also other substances that you can add to the inks to get different effects. We'll keep it pretty simple today. As with oil paints, you put out a little bit of it at a time. This might be nice amount of ink to use for several of the 7 by 9 inch prints that we'll be making today. You can add a little bit of this as you become used to doing it to make it easier to work with, but it comes out of the bottle pretty easy to work with, and you might not have to add that blending medium at first. This is the blue. You don't need as much of that. It stands to reason. But just like oil paints and any type of paint, the old rule applies. If you want to save yourself time and save yourself some ink, you'll apply the dark to the light. Now, we do have just a very little bit of blue ink on there. And flip it over and back, really just like oil paints or acrylics. Add in more ink as needed to get to the value that you want, which in this case will be a middle value blue. You get the white for free, and the white doesn't print. It's built into the paper. So all you really need is your mid values and your dark values. And how about a little bit more? Plan yourself a simple palette of several colors. I'm just using an old scrap piece of plexiglass to mix it. And if you get a nice big palette, you can have many colors, but you can mix them just like the oil paints. So it's not necessary to have a lot of colors out at one time. Practice on this plexiglass, if you like, applying the inks. But let's go right to the brayer, because it is one thing that is a nice place to start. Again, a brayer, just like I said, is designed to apply a very even and consistent amount of ink to a plexiglass plate. So this helps you as you make your first prints. So roll it out a little bit at a time. Roll down, roll back up, down, up. Pick it up each time. The brayer spins a little bit, and it creates a little bit of a spin. It evens out the application on the brayer. If you've gotten to a velvety look, you're probably at a pretty good consistency to start. You can apply it thicker, but it complicates making a hand-rolled print because you don't have the pressure of a printing press. One thing to remember is if you've got it to a nice velvety texture and you think it's just perfect, you might want to try rolling it again. You can get a thinner application of ink just by rolling it thinner and thinner. And if you use a brayer, you're going to get a very even application of ink if you practice at it. So you can get transparency effects with a thinner application of ink, and you get more opaque effects by adding a little bit of ink in there. Each time you roll it out and you recharge the brayer. What else can you do with a brayer? Well, there's actually a lot of things, and there's things you can do with a brayer that you might at first think you should pick up a paintbrush for that, but in fact you can do it with a brayer. You can draw with it. That's using the corner. It takes a little practice, but if you get an even amount of ink on there, you can press down harder for a thicker line. You can wiggle it a little for a different kind of line. Bounce it. It's soft rubber after all. And so the brayer might be a nice place to start for you. Store the brayer on its bracket, and then you won't get marks in your ink. This will keep your ink ready to go for the next application. I think we're ready to start a print. Let's try making a monotype. Remember what I said. You'll want to roll the ink out a little bit more than you think it should be rolled out, and it will have a velvety texture. Go slow. Roll down. Recharge. Roll back up. And keep doing that until you get the thickness that you want. I recommend doing it several times. One way you can check it is to pick up the plate. You can see the light shining through. The more you put on, or the more layers I should say, the more opaque it'll be, and you can get it nice and even by rolling it over and over again in thin layers. It's a good way to work. Trim up your edges with your rag if you want. And don't forget to try drawing with the brayer. Hold it at an angle. Have fun with it. The paintbrush is going to put it down thicker, and you can get your brushstroke effects by putting the right amount down. It's obviously a matter of experimentation. Well, we'll try that. And you can add in the blending medium. I don't know if you can see that on the plate, but it's the Akua blending medium, and that will make it thinner and more watery and might get you some nice painterly effects. Getting the plate to look like what the final print is of course the tough part. And takes practice. The rag is actually one of your favorite tools, or it's one of my favorite tools, and you can put a little bit of the soap solution in there and you can draw with it. Obviously, anything you wipe away that shows the bare plexi plate is going to print white because of the paper, or perhaps I should say off-white. What are some of the other things you can do? You can scrape. Well, here, let's try a couple things with the Brayer. I showed you a couple of them. And you can draw with the Brayer. It takes a little practice. You just hold your wrist loosely as you learn to do in drawing class, and use the corner. So those are various ways of mark making. We tried the brush, and we'll see how that works in the final analysis. But you can also take things away, and the mat board splint can be nice for that. When you use mat board, it leaves a little ridge, and that is going to have a slightly blobby effect when you print, because the ink will be thicker there than that nice even layer that you put down with the Brayer. So that'll take a little getting used to, but it can be, with practice, it can be dealt with. This is a comb. And even the end of the brush is going to give you a lot of different effects here. So play around a little bit, especially on your first print. Make your first print small, and you can do a lot of them, and you can check it out. Whenever you need to see what it's going to look like, pick up the plate and let the light shine through it. So we took some things, we put some things in, we took some away. We'll do that again. This is the mat board shard, the splint. And we're going to take the roller and roll back into that. Actually, I'm running out of room, and I guess I'll make that bigger. There we go, that's a little better. And we'll cover that up and we'll see what that does, but as you pick up the plate, I think you'll see that it's liable to have a different effect. Okay, let's try some stenciling. And say, for example, this is tarlatan. It's a printmaker's cloth. And you can use cheesecloth. You can use anything, really. And you can use it as a stencil. So let's do that. We'll go along that edge. And we'll roll over the ragged edge. And you will get a stencil effect there. This is an onion bag from the grocery store. And we wipe that away. And we'll try this. Right there. And we'll see what kind of effect we get from that. So those are some stencil effects. You can stencil right onto the plate, but it has to be something very, very thin, or else it messes up your composition because you're hand rolling. So we'll try this string, and we'll put that there. If you do roll another ink over the first ink, and we're going to roll them both together, and we're going to get kind of a rainbow effect on the brayer. But if you roll it over the first ink, you'll sometimes get different effects that way too. And this is owing to the viscosity, or the relative stiffness or movability of the ink. So we'll get rid of that. And I don't know if you can see it, but the white, the lighter and the darker blues have combined a little bit there to create a kind of a texture. This is a very thin tissue paper. Has to be very thin, or else it does mess with your composition, because it holds the ink up off it holds the brayer up off the plate. The ink does. And that's going to make it hard to get an even. But you can paint on your stencil. So that's a few things you can do. You're limited only by your imagination and by what works. And when this is all said and done, what works is what comes out well during the printmaking process. So why don't we print it? Let's try a print. The first thing to remember is to work clean, and with that in mind, We'll wash our hands. I don't usually do this over the print, but you can use the same dish detergent. And you can just rub it and wipe it with a rag. That'll keep your print paper clean. And you may also think about using the same rag to make sure your edges are nice and clean. Any place you might have wiped out areas, you might want to check those again in case there was some residue. If you want that nice and white, that's how you do that. And of course, nobody can really resist tinkering with your composition. I like to sometimes distress it. So you can take a rough edge and create an area like that. Place the paper inside the template. The border will help you to keep the edges clean. And a slip sheet of clean scrap paper will keep stray ink from marking the back of your print. Use the brayer, starting at the bottom and going slowly up with good, even, heavy pressure. Do it about 3 or 4 times. And if you have children, this might be a good time for you to do the first or last roll to give them a little bit extra oomph. It'll improve the impression. Let's see what we got. The final result will vary depending on how well and how evenly you applied the ink. The thicker areas will print darker, whereas the thinner, more even areas will be faithful too, but they'll be lighter. Areas where you add in the blending medium can tend to be pretty light. You can practice over the course of your first few prints and see what works best for you. Thanks for watching.